Beneath a sky rinsed in silver starlight, a ring of weathered stones rises from the quiet earth, patient as breath. They do not announce themselves. They do not tower like mountains or glitter like cities. They simply stand, ancient, veiled and marked by the moon. It is said that some places are not built to be entered, but to be approached slowly, as one approaches a memory that has waited centuries to be remembered. The journey begins at a distance. We stand beyond the outer curve of stone, where grass bends gently beneath the night wind. The horizon is wide and oceanic, stretching into a darkness that feels older than language. Above, the stars hang in sacred silence, their light arriving from distances too vast to measure, and beneath them the circle rests. Was it raised to summon the sun, or to say farewell to it? The question does not demand an answer. It drifts, soft as breath, between stone and sky. As we step closer, the silhouettes sharpen against the moonlit plain. Lichen clings to the pillars like faded script, pale green and silver, as though time itself has been writing and erasing the same word again and again. The stones are crumbled at their edges, softened by wind and rain, but their posture remains deliberate, upright, listening. The ground within the ring feels pressed by centuries of reverent footsteps. Dust settles here differently. Even the air seems to move with care. Curiosity awakens gently, like a single candle lit in a vast chamber of night. In forgotten corners of the earth, people once believed that stone could remember, that it absorbed the echo of voices, the warmth of palms, the weight of silence. If this is true, then these stones have been listening for a very long time. We drift inward. The circle does not resist our presence. It does not welcome it either. It simply holds its shape, a spiral without movement, a boundary without walls. Standing at its threshold feels like pausing at the edge of a sacred chamber where sky becomes ceiling and earth becomes altar. Some believe the stones form an ancient calendar. They speak of alignment, of solstice light slipping precisely between two pillars at the longest day, of winter dawn entering like a thin blade of gold on the coldest morning. They trace invisible lines from stone to horizon, from horizon to sun, as if mapping the breath of the year itself. Each pillar becomes a mark in time's slow turning. Each shadow, a quiet measurement. It is said that the builders watched the heavens more closely than they watched kings, that they read the sky the way others read scrolls, patiently, reverently, night after night. Perhaps this circle was their great instrument, not of conquest, but of noticing. And yet others feel something different beneath the silence. They say the circle is not a clock, but a gate, a sacred threshold between earth and sky where breath and starlight mingle, a place where the veil thins at dawn, where the rising sun is not calculated, but welcomed like an old companion. In this telling, the stones are not markers of time, but guardians of presence. They frame the light not to measure it, but to honor it. The contradiction lingers softly. Is this geometry an instrument of time, or an offering to something unseen? Perhaps it is both. Beneath the silence, myths echo of quiet ceremonies, of figures standing shoulder to shoulder in dawn's first glow. No loud proclamation, no frantic movement, only stillness. They gathered not to demand the sun's return, but to witness it. They watched the horizon pale from charcoal to ash to rose. They felt the chill air soften against their skin. Some believe no words were spoken, because certain alignments are too delicate for language. As the hours before dawn thin, we imagine what it must have been like to stand here centuries ago. The plain would have been darker then, no distant lights, no restless hum beyond the horizon, only wind and sky and the faint silver of stars dissolving one by one. The eastern edge of the world begins to lighten. A faint breath of color touches the horizon. It is so subtle at first that it feels imagined. The stones, still draped in shadow, appear almost translucent against the growing glow. And then, slowly, a line of pale gold spills between two pillars. It does not rush. It arrives the way morning always arrives, without applause, without certainty, without needing to be believed. The light enters the circle like a guest invited long ago. For those who saw this as calendar, it was confirmation. The turning of seasons made visible, the promise that darkness does not endure forever, that the long night yields, that winter loosens, that the year continues its spiral. For those who saw this as temple, it was communion, the sun crossing a sacred threshold, touching stone and skin alike, a blessing poured quietly across the earth. And perhaps the builders understood something that we have slowly forgotten, that measuring and honoring are not opposites, that to observe the sky with precision can be as sacred as to kneel before it. The light widens. It spills across the interior ground, illuminating small stones embedded in soil, revealing the uneven texture of lichen, the hairline cracks shaped by centuries of frost. For a brief moment, the circle feels complete, shadow and glow balanced in quiet conversation. Then the sun rises fully. The careful alignment dissolves into ordinary daylight. Shadows shrink. The dramatic framing softens into something simple and familiar. Birds begin their morning calls beyond the ring. The wind resumes its restless wandering. The circle offers no explanation. It does not declare itself calendar. It does not insist it is temple. It remains, a chamber of alignment, a veil between shadow and light. Where memory fades, the stones endure. Centuries have passed since the first dawn was framed here. Empires have risen and fallen beyond the plain. Languages have shifted. Names have dissolved into dust. And still, each year, the sun arrives at its appointed hour, slipping between the pillars as if nothing has changed. Perhaps it was never meant to be solved. Perhaps the circle was built not to answer a question, but to hold one. There is something tender in that. In the world that seeks to measure everything, to label, to define, to conquer uncertainty, this ring of stone simply waits. It does not hurry the dawn. It does not cling to the night. It stands at the meeting point, patient as breath. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps the circle has been echoing for millennia. As morning settles fully across the plain, the silver starlight fades into pale blue sky. The magic of alignment recedes into memory, becoming once again a story whispered among stones. Visitors will come and go. Scholars will trace lines across parchment and screens. Pilgrims will stand within the ring and close their eyes. Each will feel something slightly different. Some will sense ancient astronomy, a careful mapping of celestial rhythm. Others will feel devotion, a sacred chamber without walls. Some will feel only wind and grass and stone, and all of it will be true. Because beneath the silence, the circle does not demand agreement. It asks only presence. We step back beyond the outer curve. The stones now stand in full daylight, less mysterious perhaps, but no less patient. The question that carried us here, summon or farewell, rests gently in the air, unanswered and untroubled. The sun climbs higher, the plain warms, shadows shorten into stillness, and the circle waits again. It will wait through afternoon heat, through twilight's cooling breath, through another night rinsed in starlight. It will wait for the next solstice dawn, and the next, holding its geometry steady against the long oceanic tide of time. Perhaps that is its true purpose, not to control light, not to predict it, but to witness it, to remind us that the world turns in spirals, not lines, that dawn follows darkness without drama, that alignment once found does not need to shout. We leave the plain quietly. Behind us, the ring of weathered stones continues its vigil, marked by the moon, warmed by the sun, softened by wind. It remains a chamber open to sky, a sacred emptiness shaped in stone. And as distance grows between us and the circle, the memory of that first thin line of gold between pillars lingers, gentle, luminous, unresolved. Some truths were never meant to be solved. They were meant to be stood within. At the edge of Salisbury Plain, where wind moves like a whispered memory across open grass, the stones stand in solemn stillness, before the sun rises fully, before the birds begin their fragile morning hymns. There is a moment when the world feels suspended, neither night nor day, neither shadow nor light. In that delicate hour, a single beam of midsummer dawn slips between ancient pillars. It arrives quietly. No trumpet of fire, no sudden blaze, only a thin line of gold, steady and patient, entering a circle of stone that has waited for centuries. Was this alignment deliberate, a careful act of sky-watching carved into earth? Or was it coincidence shaped by longing, a pattern we see because we wish to see it? The question rises without urgency. It drifts through cool morning air like mist across the plain. The stones do not answer. They stand as they always have, weathered, crumbled at their edges, softened by wind and centuries of rain. Lichen clings to their surfaces like pale script, star-marked and unreadable. Their shadows stretch long across dew-laced grass, then retreat as the light grows stronger. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, ancient peoples watch the sky as one listens to a sacred text. They did not read it with ink and parchment. They read it with breath and patience. They traced the path of the sun across horizon after horizon. They marked the moon's slow spiral through darkness. They memorized the returning stars. And here, on this oceanic plain, they raised stones. We move slowly through the ring. The ground within feels different, pressed by centuries of presence, by feet that once stood in silence at dawn. Dust rises faintly with each imagined step, then settles again as though unwilling to disturb the air. The stones form a rough circle, but not a perfect one. There is human intention here, yet also humility. The geometry is careful, but not proud. Some believe the builders were guardians of celestial rhythm. They speak of solstices and equinoxes, of the longest day, when the sun lingers as if reluctant to leave, of the shortest day, when its return feels like mercy. They point to the alignment of heel stones and outer trilithons, to corridors of light that appear only at certain hours of certain seasons. To them, this circle is an instrument, a calendar carved into earth, a monument to the turning year, a way of measuring the sky. It is easy to imagine this. Figures gathered before dawn, watching the eastern horizon with quiet focus, waiting for that first blade of gold to pierce the ring, confirming through stone and shadow that time continues its steady spiral. The idea feels precise, almost human. To measure is to steady the heart, to know that winter will yield, to see in the alignment of stone and sun proof that darkness does not last forever. And yet, others feel something deeper beneath the silence. They say this was never merely a calendar. They say it was a temple, an altar of balance where light and darkness met in sacred pause, a place where the rising sun was not calculated but welcomed, a threshold between worlds where earth and sky briefly touched through a corridor of gold. In this telling, the stones are not instruments but witnesses. They do not measure time, they honor it. Dust and breath mingle in the hush. The wind moves through the ring as though tracing old paths between pillars. When clouds pass overhead, shadows ripple across the grass like ocean waves against a quiet shore. Beneath the silence, the stones seem to listen. We imagine hands that once guided these monoliths into place, hands roughened by rope and soil, steady with intention. It is said that the stones were not always here, that some traveled from distant hills, carried across rivers and plains with immense patience, blue stones from Wales, pale sarsen blocks from nearby ridges. Why move such weight across such distance? Whispers tell us that the journey itself was ritual, that the act of carrying stone was a ceremony of devotion, that each step across the earth aligned the builders not only with the sky, but with one another. To lift stone is to acknowledge gravity. To align stone is to acknowledge light. Perhaps they understood that time is not only counted, it is felt. As the dawn deepens, the beam of sunlight widens between the pillars. It touches the inner ground, revealing textures long hidden by night. The small pebbles pressed into soil, the uneven surfaces shaped by centuries of frost. For a brief moment, the circle feels complete, its geometry illuminated, its purpose suggested but never declared. The idea of a calendar feels grounded. The idea of a temple feels vast. Perhaps the circle is both, a quiet acknowledgement that time itself is sacred. In forgotten ages, before written chronicles, before numbered years, people did not divide time into small and hurried pieces. They felt it as a rhythm, a long inhalation of winter, a slow exhalation of summer, a spiral rather than a line. Here, beneath the open sky, that spiral becomes visible. The sun does not rush. It ascends gradually, as if honoring the stones that frame it. The careful alignment dissolves into ordinary daylight. The corridor of gold softens into broad illumination. The moment passes, but something lingers. As we stand within the ring, curiosity softens into wonder. The question of deliberate design fades into a quieter appreciation. Whether by precision or by longing, the stones have framed the sky in a way that feels intentional. They teach without speaking. They show that observation can be reverence, that measurement can be devotion. When twilight returns hours later, the scene changes. Shadows stretch long across the grass. The stones darken against a sky that blushes, then deepens into indigo. Stars reappear one by one, like ancient witnesses resuming their posts. Some believe the builders returned at night as well, that they traced constellations between pillars, that the circle marked not only the sun's path, but the moon's rare alignments, that it was a celestial chamber, open to all directions, receiving both dawn and starlight. Where memory fades, the stones remain. Empires have risen beyond this plane. Languages have shifted like wind through grass. The hands that lifted these pillars dissolved into dust long ago. And yet, each year, the solstice light still enters. It does not require belief. It simply arrives. Perhaps that is the most sacred thing about this place, that it continues without needing to explain itself. The stones do not insist on one interpretation. They do not demand that we choose between instrument and altar. They stand in balance. In the growing dusk, the circle becomes silhouette once more. The grass moves in slow waves around its base. A faint chill settles into the air. The horizon dims, and with it, our need for clarity. We step back beyond the ring. From a distance, the stones appear smaller, almost fragile against the vastness of the sky, and yet their presence feels immense. They have framed not only the sun, but our own longing to understand the turning world. Was it deliberate? Was it coincidence shaped by devotion? The questions fade gently. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps the builders did not seek to leave answers. Perhaps they sought to leave alignment. A reminder that we live beneath a sky that moves in rhythm, that light returns, that darkness rests, that the year unfolds like a slow spiral carved into earth. The plain grows quiet. Night settles fully, marked by the moon. The stones absorb its silver glow, their surfaces pale and ancient. Wind moves softly between them, like breath between ribs. They continue to measure the sky, not by counting, but by standing. And as we leave them to their vigil, we carry not certainty but a feeling, gentle and spacious like the horizon at dawn, a sense that time, when framed by stone and silence, becomes something less hurried, something sacred. The sky above remains vast, the earth below remains steady, and between them the stones endure, veiled, star-marked and patient, waiting for another beam of light to slip between their ancient pillars. Perhaps they were never meant to be solved. Perhaps they were meant to remind us how to look up. In the dim blue hour before sunrise, when night loosens its hold but does not yet depart, A narrow corridor of stone waits. It does not call attention to itself. It does not gleam or shimmer. It simply stands, ancient, veiled and marked by the moon. The air is cool upon the plain. A thin mist hovers close to the earth, drifting low across grass silvered with dew. Above, the last stars linger in sacred silence, their light faint but faithful. And there, aligned with the sleeping horizon, the corridor opens, a path of stone framed with quiet intention. It is said that once each year, in the hush of midsummer dawn, the sun enters this corridor like a guest invited long ago. The journey begins in that waiting, before the light arrives, before the world stirs, before certainty returns with the day. Was this passage built as a calendar's spine, a line drawn across earth to mark the turning of seasons? Or was it shaped as a sacred gate through which light itself could pass, blessing stone and breath alike? The question rests softly in the air, like mist that does not yet rise. We stand at the edge of the corridor. The stones on either side are weathered and crumbled at their edges, yet they hold their posture with quiet dignity. Lichen clings to their surfaces like faded script, pale and unreadable. Each pillar bears the touch of wind, rain, frost, centuries folded into texture. Beneath the silence, the corridor feels deliberate, not accidental, not hurried, but shaped with care, as though the builders knew precisely where the sun would rise and waited patiently for its return. In forgotten corners of the earth, ancient watchers once traced the sky with attentive eyes. They did not measure time in hurried fragments. They felt it as rhythm, a long spiral of light and shadow. They noticed how the sun drifted along the horizon through the year, rising slightly north, then slightly south, until it paused at the edge of its journey. That pause became sacred. Some believed the solstice marked the earth's turning breath, a moment when the year inhaled or exhaled, depending on the season. The longest day was not merely a length of hours, it was a threshold, a balance point, a stillness within motion. To mark such a moment in stone was not simply practical, it was devotional. We imagine ancient figures gathered here before dawn, wrapped in wool and quiet, standing shoulder to shoulder along the outer curve of the corridor, their breath visible in the cool air. No loud proclamation, no frantic movement, only watchfulness. Their eyes would have been lifted toward the eastern edge of the world, waiting. The stones form a chamber where echoes linger, a narrow frame through which the horizon becomes intimate. Within this passage, the sky is not endless, it is guided, shaped, given boundary. The vastness is held gently between pillars. Whispers tell us that when the sun finally rose at its furthest northern point, its light entered this corridor with uncanny precision. A thin blade of gold cutting through blue shadow. It traveled along the earth, illuminating the inner stones, warming pale surfaces that had waited in darkness. To some, this was proof of knowledge. The builders were sky watchers, careful observers who understood celestial rhythm. They carved alignment into earth the way scribes carved letters into clay. The corridor became a spine, a line upon which the year could be measured. To others it was something softer. They believed this was not about counting days, but about honoring them. The solstice was not a calculation, but a visitation. The sun crossing the threshold was not a predictable event, but a blessing renewed. In this telling, the corridor is not a spine, but a gate, a sacred opening where the veil thinned between worlds. As we move deeper into the imagined past, contradiction becomes gentle companion. The alignment feels too deliberate for chance, too exact to be accidental, and yet it feels too reverent for mere utility. Who shapes stone with such devotion only to count? Who measures the sky without also feeling its wonder? The builders left no written answer. No scrolls were buried beneath these stones explaining their intention. No carved inscription declares, "This is a calendar," or "This is a temple." Only geometry remains, geometry shaped by devotion. The sky begins to pale. A faint wash of silver replaces indigo. The stars dim, one by one, withdrawing like quiet witnesses stepping back from the stage. The horizon holds a thin line of rose. Within the corridor, shadow deepens for a moment, as though bracing itself. Then it happens. A sliver of gold appears at the far end of the passage. It does not rush. It does not burst. It enters. Light slides between the stones with a calm certainty, traveling along the ground like a whispered promise. It touches dust and dew, illuminates lichen and hairline cracks shaped by frost. The corridor becomes luminous, not blazing, but radiant in its restraint. For those who saw it as calendar, this was confirmation. The longest day had arrived. The sun had reached its appointed boundary and would soon begin its slow return. The year's arc was complete. The spiral continued. For those who saw it as gate, this was communion, light stepping into stone, heaven crossing into earth, the sacred entering the ordinary with quiet grace. The two interpretations do not cancel each other. They rest side by side like twin pillars, measured, miraculous. Within this luminous pause, something in the heart softens. The question of purpose loses its sharpness. The moment becomes less about explanation and more about presence. We feel what it might have been like to stand here centuries ago, skin warmed by the first touch of solstice light, breath steady, silence shared, the corridor holding sky and earth in careful alignment. Curiosity shifts into quiet awe. The sunrise becomes less an event and more a blessing, and then, as gently as it began, the light widens. The blade of gold softens into full morning. The precise corridor of illumination dissolves into ordinary day. Birds begin their calls across the plain. Wind stirs grass into motion. The gate closes without closing. The alignment remains, but its drama fades into the larger rhythm of daylight. The stones do not explain themselves. They do not declare their purpose. They stand, silent, enduring, open to sky. Where memory fades, the corridor remains. Empires have risen and fallen beyond these fields. Languages have shifted like drifting sand. The hands that shaped these pillars have long dissolved into dust. Yet each year, when the earth tilts toward its longest light, the sun returns to this narrow path. It enters as it always has. It leaves as it always will. Perhaps the corridor was never meant to be understood fully. Perhaps it was meant to teach a different skill, the art of watching without grasping, the discipline of standing in silence while the heavens perform their quiet ritual. Some structures are built not to control light, but to receive it. Some gates are not meant to be crossed, but to be witnessed. As the day unfolds, we step back from the passage. The corridor now appears less mysterious in broad light, its stones ordinary against the vast plain. And yet something within us has shifted. The sky above feels framed in a new way. The horizon feels intentional. We carry with us the memory of that narrow beam, of light entering shadow through a space shaped by ancient hands. Perhaps it was never meant to be found as answer. Perhaps it was meant to be felt as alignment. As evening approaches once more, the corridor will return to shadow. Moonlight will trace pale lines across its surfaces. The wind will move between the stones, an echo of breath through ancient ribs. And somewhere within the geometry of earth and sky, the solstice will wait again. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some gates only open when we are willing to stand still. The corridor remains, ancient, celestial, patient, holding its place beneath the turning heavens. And as night gathers gently across the plain, the memory of that golden entrance lingers like warmth beneath closed eyes. The gate of solstice light waits in silence, not for explanation, but for dawn. Beneath the towering trilithons, where the stones rise like ancient ribs against the sky, shadows gather in a hidden chamber of earth and bone. The journey begins not above, but below. Before the sun touches the upper lintels, before the wind moves across the open plain, there is soil, cool, patient, veiled. The grass parts gently under imagined hands, and beneath it lies a memory pressed into the ground. Fragments of ash, flecks of bone, dust that once carried breath. It is said that some monuments are built not only to be seen, but to guard what cannot be seen. We stand within the ring, but our attention turns downward. The air feels thicker here, as though it holds unspoken names. Beneath the silence, the earth seems to hum faintly with something older than light. Were these stones raised for the living to watch the heavens, or for the dead to rest beneath them? The question does not rise sharply. It settles like falling dust. Long before the stones weathered into their present form, before lichen wrote its pale script upon them, this place was chosen. In forgotten corners of the earth, ancient peoples did not divide sky from soil so easily. The rising sun and the returning body were part of the same spiral. What ascended at dawn would one day descend at dusk. And here, beneath these stones, something descended. Whispers tell us that when archaeologists first touched this ground with careful hands, they uncovered cremated remains, fragments of bone shaped by fire and time, ash mixed with chalky soil, silent evidence that bodies once burned beneath open sky before being returned to earth within the circle. The discovery was quiet, no dramatic revelation, only bone and dust, patient as ever. Some scholars speak of burial rites, of ancestral reverence, of a sacred ground where generations returned to dust, where memory was entrusted to stone. They imagine flames flickering in twilight, smoke rising into indigo sky, the scent of wood and wind mingling in solemn air. The living gathered not in haste, but in vigil. Firelight would have danced against the inner surfaces of the stones, shadows stretching long across the ring, sparks lifting upward like small temporary stars. The body, once animated by breath, returned to flame, the flame returned to ash, the ash returned to earth, a cycle held gently within stone. And yet, others see the circle differently. They speak of alignments and solstices, of corridors of light marking the longest day and the longest night. To them, the purpose of the circle was not downward, but upward, its gaze fixed on the sky, its geometry shaped by celestial rhythm rather than earthly remains. The tension between above and below becomes the chapter's quiet heartbeat. Was this an observatory, a calendar carved into land to measure the heavens? Or was it a tomb, a chamber of ancestral return? Beneath the silence, the soil does not choose sides. We descend in imagination to a time when the stones were newly raised, their surfaces sharp, their forms unsoftened by centuries of rain, the ground within the circle still fresh from disturbance. Chalk and earth mingled with intention. It is said that the earliest phase of the monument may have been more modest, earthen banks and wooden posts marking sacred boundary, before the towering trilithons, before the heavy lintels framed the sky. In that earlier age, the dead were already present. The circle began not only as architecture, but as threshold. We imagine figures moving quietly across the plain, carrying urns of ash, the wind brushing their garments, the horizon wide and unguarded. They enter the circle with care. The earth within receives what the body has released. No inscription marks the spot, no name carved in stone. The memory is held not in letters, but in presence. Some believe the builders did not separate life from death so sharply, that to watch the rising sun while standing above ancestral ground was not contradiction, but harmony, the living and the dead occupying the same sacred geometry. Dawn and dusk held within the same spiral. The stones stand between worlds, between breath and silence, between flame and frost, between the rising sun and the returning soul. As layers unfold, curiosity softens into something more tender. The idea of burial beneath the circle changes the way we see it. The ring becomes not only frame for the sky, but shelter for memory. The soil beneath our imagined feet feels different. dense with quiet history. Where memory fades, earth remembers. The fragments of bone discovered here are small, almost fragile. Time has worn them into anonymity. We do not know the names of those who rest beneath. We do not know their faces, their voices, their stories. The stones offer no biography, only presence. In forgotten centuries, perhaps children stood where we stand now, unaware that beneath their steps lay the remains of grandparents and elders. Perhaps they watched solstice light enter the corridor, while knowing that beneath them rested those who once watched the same. The circle becomes layered. Above, the heavens. Below, the earth. Between them, human breath. Some scholars suggest that the monument's function evolved over time, that what began as burial ground gradually expanded into something more monumental. The massive sarsen stones erected later, the alignment refined, the ritual widened. But even as its form changed, the soil beneath remained sacred. Perhaps the builders understood that death is not separate from time, that to measure the year is also to measure a life, that the turning of seasons mirrors the turning of generations. Emotional currents drift from inquiry into gentle melancholy. We imagine standing here at twilight, the sun lowering beyond the ring, casting long shadows across grass. The wind cooler now, a small fire burning at the center, ashes placed carefully into a shallow pit. The living bow their heads, no loud lament, only stillness. Beneath the silence, the earth receives. Above, the first stars appear. The dead remain unnamed, yet not forgotten. The circle, in its quiet geometry, shelters both the rising sun and the returning body. It does not privilege one over the other. It frames light at dawn and guards ash at dusk. Perhaps the builders did not see these as separate acts. Perhaps to them, watching the heavens while standing upon ancestral ground was the deepest alignment of all. In this understanding, the circle becomes not observatory or tomb alone, but something more subtle, a chamber of continuity. A place where what rises and what falls are held within the same boundary of stone. We move slowly back toward the present. The trilithons tower above, pale and weathered. Tourists walk the outer path by day, their footsteps light upon ancient soil. Few pause to consider what lies beneath, and yet the earth remains undisturbed in its deeper layers, guarding fragments of bone as faithfully as ever. The wind moves through the ring, brushing grass and stone alike. The dead do not speak. The sky remains wide. Whether tomb or temple, the circle shelters a sacred ambiguity. As night returns, the stones darken against a field of stars. Moonlight traces their edges, silver and forgiving. Beneath that cool glow, the ground appears smooth and unmarked. No visible sign of the ashes that rest below, and yet something lingers, a sense that memory itself is a chamber, dark, echoing, gently illuminated by starlight. We carry our own ancestors within us, just as this soil carries its quiet remains. The living walk above the dead. The sun rises above both. Perhaps that is the deeper mystery, that monuments endure not because they solve questions, but because they hold them. The circle does not declare, "I am a tomb." It does not insist, "I am an observatory." It stands, patient between sky and soil. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some chambers are not entered by stairs, but by imagination. As we step away from the ring, the plain stretches wide and oceanic under night. The stones recede into silhouette. The earth beneath them rests undisturbed, cradling ash and silence. The wind continues its quiet passage, and we are left with a softened understanding that life and death, like dawn and dusk, share the same horizon. The chamber beneath the stone remains unseen, yet present. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully uncovered. Perhaps it was meant to remind us that beneath every monument to light there is earth. Beneath every rising sun there is returning dust. And within that gentle balance, something sacred waits, unspoken, unnamed, enduring. Far from the open plain, before the circle rose against the sky, before shadow and solstice found their frame, the story begins with water. A silver river moves through mist-wrapped valleys, slow and patient beneath a pale moon. Its surface is smooth as breath. Reeds bend along its edges. The hills lean inward, listening. And upon its quiet current, in the hush of an age long buried, something immense begins to travel. It is said the stones did not always belong to the plain. They were once cradled in distant hills, blue-grey monoliths sleeping among rock and root. They stood beneath different skies, breathed different winds. And then, one season, they were loosened from their ancient resting places and guided toward the water. Why move such immense stone across breathless distance? The question ripples softly across the river's surface. In forgotten corners of the earth, people once believed that the journey of a thing was as sacred as its destination, that to carry weight across land and water was not merely labor, but offering. That movement itself aligned earth with sky. We imagine the first loosening of stone from hill, hands steady against rough surface, ropes woven from plant fiber, wrapped carefully around edges worn by time, voices low, not shouting, but murmuring in rhythm with effort. No haste, no spectacle, only intention. The stone shifts, it tilts, it descends. Dust rises in pale spirals beneath bare feet. Breath deepens. The earth yields its ancient burden not in protest, but in quiet consent. Whispers tell us that the smaller blue stones, the ones later found within the circle, may have come from the Preseli Hills of Wales. A journey of many miles, across valleys and rivers, through forests and over chalky ridges. The distance itself feels oceanic when imagined in the age before wheels turned freely across land. Some believe this was a practical choice, that the stones were valued for their strength, their color, their sound when struck, that they were brought to mark the turning year in a place of open horizon, where solstice light could enter unbroken by hill or tree. Others believe something gentler. They say the act of transport was a sacred pilgrimage, that each movement of stone was mirrored by the movement of stars, that as the sun traced its slow spiral across the heavens, the stones traced their own spiral across the earth, hill to river, river to plain, motion reflecting motion, and so the river becomes central to the story. We follow the imagined procession. The stones, shaped roughly but reverently, are lowered onto wooden sledges. They are guided toward the river's edge, where water waits like a silent accomplice. The air smells of moss and mineral. Mist curls above the surface in early dawn. The stones are heavy, yet the river is patient. It is said that rafts of timber may have been bound together, crude but steady, the stones lifted carefully, inch by inch, onto floating platforms, the water receiving their weight with a subtle shift, then holding it. There is no rush in this vision. The river does not roar, it does not resist, it carries. Moonlight touches the water, turning it silver. The stones rest upon its surface like sleeping giants, their reflections trembling beneath them. Oars dip gently into current. The procession moves forward, slow as breath. Why water? Why not only land? Perhaps because water transforms the act of transport into something more than effort. It becomes passage, crossing, threshold. Beneath the silence, the river feels ceremonial. In forgotten centuries, rivers were not simply paths, they were witnesses. They carried offerings, ashes, prayers folded into leaves. To entrust stone to water was to submit it to a different kind of blessing. Dust and tide, muscle and moonlight converged in this movement. As the raft drifts, the sky shifts from indigo to ash. Dawn spreads thin gold across the valley. The hills recede behind them. Ahead lies the long path toward open plain. The stones travel in silence. Perhaps songs were sung, perhaps none at all. Perhaps the rhythm of oars was enough. We imagine villages along the riverbanks watching the passage, children pointing at the enormous shapes gliding slowly through morning mist, elders nodding with quiet understanding, the stones moving not as objects of conquest, but as guests. Some scholars speak of logistics, of seasonal timing when rivers ran full, of cooperative labor across communities. They measure distances and propose routes. They trace possible channels on maps. And yet, beneath these explanations, something remains intangible. The effort required to shape and move such weight speaks of devotion rather than haste. No empire compelled this labor. No written decree survives demanding it. The movement of stone appears voluntary, almost tender. The river continues its course. It bends around chalk cliffs and willow groves. It widens and narrows. It receives tributaries like whispered agreements. And through it all, the stones drift closer to their final resting place. When they reach shallower waters, hands return to rope and wood. The stones are lifted again, guided across the last stretch of land. The plain opens before them, wide, unguarded, touched by vast sky. Perhaps the first time the builders saw the open horizon of Salisbury Plain, they felt something align within them, the absence of enclosing hills, the clear view of solstice dawn, the way light would enter without obstruction. The stones, once cradled by valleys, would now stand beneath unbroken sky. The act of raising them becomes the final ritual. We imagine trenches dug into chalky earth, foundations prepared with care, the stone tipped upright, voices steady, ropes pulled in slow unison, the monolith rising gradually, resisting gravity until it yields to its new posture. When it stands, a hush follows, dust settles, hands release rope, the stone breathes in its new place. Where memory fades, the river continues to move. It does not pause to witness the final alignment. It does not remain to see solstice light enter the corridor of stone. It flows onward, indifferent and eternal, carrying leaves, fish, fragments of branch. And yet, something of it remains within the circle. The stones, shaped by distant hills and carried by water, hold within them the memory of motion. They were not born on the plain. They arrived. Between motion and rest lies the mystery. We stand now within the completed circle, imagining the echo of that long journey. The stones are grounded, immovable, rooted in chalk and time. They appear eternal, and yet they were once travelers. Perhaps the true alignment was not only with the sun. Perhaps it was with the act of journey itself. To move stone across land and water requires cooperation, patience, shared breath. It transforms community into procession. It turns geography into ritual. The circle on the plain becomes not merely a monument to sky, but a memory of river. When solstice dawn enters the stones, perhaps it also enters the memory of valleys and currents. The light touches surfaces shaped by hills far away. It warms rock that once lay under different constellations. The monument contains distance. As evening falls across the plain, the stones darken against amber sky. Shadows lengthen into quiet lines across grass. The wind moves gently, carrying faint scent of water from distant streams. We close our eyes and listen, not for voices, not for explanation, but for the low, steady murmur of river in the dark. It is still flowing somewhere beyond the hills. It still carries silt and reflection. It still witnesses the turning year without claiming credit. The stones remain, grounded and still. The river moves, restless and eternal. Between them rests a truth too subtle for inscription. Some monuments begin long before they stand. Some alignments begin with movement. Perhaps it was never only about marking the sky. Perhaps it was about honoring the path, hill to river, river to plain, motion to stillness. A spiral carved not just into earth, but into memory. As night deepens, the plain grows quiet. The circle becomes silhouette beneath a field of stars. Moonlight traces pale edges across ancient surfaces. The river flows unseen. And we are left with a softened awareness that beneath every stone fixed in place there is a story of motion. Beneath every monument to stillness there is a current that once carried it. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some rivers continue their song long after the journey ends. The water moves on, the stones remain. And somewhere between them, in that quiet space between current and chalk, something sacred lingers, unspoken, veiled, enduring. Winter settles over the plain like a slow silver hush. Frost gathers along the grass, tracing delicate patterns that vanish at the first touch of light. The air is thin, crystalline. Breath rises in pale mist and dissolves into the dark. Above, the sky stretches wide and star-marked, vast and unblinking. Within that cold expanse, the stones stand. Their surfaces are veiled in rime, edges softened by centuries of wind and ice. Under a thin winter sun, they cast long blue shadows that reach across the ground like quiet rivers of dusk. The circle appears heavier in this season, more solemn, more patient. The journey begins with the longest night. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, people once felt this night not as a date upon a scroll, but as a deepening breath within the body of the year. Darkness did not arrive suddenly. It lengthened slowly day by day until the sun seemed reluctant to rise at all. And on that night, when the earth tilted furthest from warmth, something sacred unfolded. Did the circle serve as a beacon of hope, marking the sun's slow return? The question rests gently in the frost-laced air. We imagine ancient figures gathered here, wrapped in wool and silence. The plain around them lies hushed beneath cold sky. No leaves tremble, no insects stir. Only wind, faint and distant, brushes across chalk and stone. They have come before dawn. They know the night is at its longest. They have felt the shortening days in their bones. They have watched the sun dip lower along the horizon each afternoon, retreating into shadow. And now they wait. Some say the stones formed a calendar of survival, that this alignment, subtle and deliberate, allowed them to endure winter's wait. When food thinned and firewood dwindled, when frost bit at fingertips and breath lingered in the chest like a fragile ember, they needed reassurance. The solstice provided it, the moment when darkness ceased to grow, when the spiral of the year turned gently toward light again. To mark that moment in stone was not merely practical, it was necessary. In this telling, the circle becomes a compass in a season of doubt, a quiet reminder that cold does not last forever, that even at the depth of shadow, the sun is preparing its return. But others believe something softer. They say the ritual was not only about survival, but reverence, that the longest night was not an enemy to conquer, but a presence to honor. That darkness itself held wisdom, deep, veiled, and sacred. The vigil was not frantic. It was tender, a gathering to sit with shadow. Beneath the silence, the stones seem to absorb the cold. Their surfaces glow faintly under starlight. The frost clings to them like delicate script, as if winter itself has written a blessing upon their ancient faces. The circle encloses not warmth, but stillness. We move slowly within the ring. The ground beneath feels firm, almost brittle. Footsteps crunch softly. The stones tower above, yet their shadows stretch farther still, long and blue under the first faint hint of dawn. It is said that at winter solstice, the sun rises at its southernmost point along the horizon, a place far from its summer entrance. A narrow corridor between pillars frames this arrival, more subtle than in midsummer, more intimate. The builders must have known this. They must have stood here through many winters, observing the slow retreat of light. They must have traced its path with quiet eyes, noticing the day when it paused. And so they shaped stone accordingly. Whispers tell us that on the longest night, fire may have been lit within the circle, small flames trembling against vast cold. Not roaring bonfires of conquest, but gentle offerings. human warmth mirrored against cosmic darkness. The people would have stood close together, breath shared, silence shared, the sound of wind moving between stones like a low, steady hymn. As the hours of darkness unfolded, apprehension may have stirred softly in the chest. Not fear exactly, but the heaviness that comes with waiting. The sense that the sun has retreated too far. That light might forget its way back. And yet, beneath that apprehension there was trust. Trust in rhythm, trust in spiral, trust in return. The emotional arc unfolds gently from uncertainty into comfort. The horizon begins to pale, not with drama, not with spectacle, but with a faint loosening of black into deep blue. The stones, still cold and veiled in frost, catch the slightest hint of change. The long shadows shift imperceptibly. The air grows quieter still, as if listening. Then, at the far edge of the world, a sliver of light appears. It is thin, fragile, almost uncertain, but it is there. Light slips between pillars, narrow, deliberate, precise. It touches the ground within the circle. It brushes against the frost, igniting it into brief brilliance. It warms stone that has held the night without complaint. For those who saw the circle as calendar, this was confirmation. The longest night had passed. Darkness had reached its limit and would now retreat. Day by day, the sun would climb higher. The spiral would unwind toward warmth. For those who saw the ritual as spiritual vigil, the moment held deeper resonance. It was not the conquest of darkness, but its completion. The sun's return did not erase the night. It followed it. The two belonged to one another. Light and shadow sharing the same breath. In that thin beam of dawn, something inside the watcher softens. The tension of waiting dissolves. The cold remains, but it no longer feels endless. The stones hold both shadow and glow with equal patience. They do not celebrate loudly. They do not proclaim victory. They simply stand, framing the return as they framed the retreat. Perhaps the circle was built not to conquer darkness, but to sit with it, to create a chamber where the longest night could be honored rather than feared, where the people could gather and remember that even in the absence of light, the sky continues its rhythm. As the sun rises higher, the thin sliver widens into full morning. Frost melts in slow, quiet surrender, shadows shorten, birds stir cautiously in the distance. The drama, if it can be called that, dissolves into ordinary day. But something has shifted. The longest night carries within it the seed of returning light. Where memory fades, this truth remains. The builders may not have spoken it in words. They carved it in alignment instead. They shaped stone to mark the moment when shadow ceased its expansion and light began its patient return. The circle becomes a reminder not only of astronomy, but of endurance. We stand now within the ring as modern visitors, yet the winter air still carries the same chill. The frost still gathers. The horizon still glows faintly at dawn. The ritual continues without us. The sun will rise each winter solstice, touching the corridor of stone, confirming once more that darkness does not last forever. But the deeper gift may not be the light itself. It may be the waiting. The willingness to stand in the longest night without fleeing, to trust that return is woven into the fabric of time, to honor shadow as necessary companion to dawn. As evening falls once more upon the plain, the stones darken again. The sky turns indigo. Stars emerge, steady and indifferent. The circle rests beneath their gaze, patient as ever. Perhaps it was never meant to banish darkness. Perhaps it was meant to teach us how to sit with it. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps the shadow that marks the longest night is not a threat, but a teacher, reminding us that within every cold horizon, light is already preparing its quiet return. The wind moves gently through the ring. Frost gathers again, and the stones, ancient and sacred, hold their place between night and dawn, guardians not of triumph but of balance. The wind moves across Salisbury Plain, low and unhurried, brushing through grass that bends like a field of whispered thoughts. It carries no record, no scroll, no carved testament of those who labored here, only the sound of air passing between stones. The chapter opens with absence. No chiseled signature rests at the base of these pillars. No inscription declares, "I was here." No chronicler stood beside the builders, ink-stained and attentive. There are only stones rising from earth, ancient, weathered, silent. Who were the hands that shaped this circle? And why did they leave no names behind? It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, some of the most sacred work was never meant to be claimed. That devotion, when pure, does not seek echo. It dissolves into the act itself. We stand at the edge of the ring at dusk. The sky is veiled in lavender and pale gold. The stones cast long shadows that stretch and overlap, merging into one another like rivers converging in the dark. Their forms feel both singular and unified, distinct pillars bound by shared geometry. The wind continues its quiet passage, and in that wind there is no memory of individual voices. We wander in imagination through scenes long dissolved into dust, ropes pulled in steady rhythm, wooden sledges creaking against chalk, hands gripping coarse fibers, palms blistered yet determined. No single figure stands above the rest. No crown gleams in firelight. No decree commands the labor. There is only effort, shared breath, the sound of muscle against gravity. Whispers tell us that the builders may have worked over generations, that the circle did not rise in a single season, but unfolded slowly, earthwork first, then timber, then stone, each phase layered upon the last, like rings within a tree. If this is true, then the monument is not the work of one mind, but many, not the vision of a single ruler, but the patience of a community. Some believe the builders were astronomers of stone, guardians of celestial order who traced the sky with attentive eyes. They noticed the shifting path of the sun along the horizon. They memorized the rare pause of solstice. They carved alignment into earth, not with arrogance, but with awe. In this telling, their anonymity feels almost deliberate, because the sky does not bear signatures. The stars rise and set without claiming authorship. The sun returns each year without inscribing its name upon the dawn. To mirror the heavens in stone may have required similar humility. Others see the builders differently. They imagine seekers of sacred ground, people attuned not only to celestial rhythm, but to the land itself. Perhaps they felt something in this open plain, something subtle beneath the silence. A place where sky and soil met without obstruction, a natural chamber waiting to be shaped. They raised the stones not to measure alone, but to consecrate. A temple without walls, a boundary without gates, a sanctuary open to wind. In this version, the lack of names becomes a veil rather than a void. The builders are not forgotten, they are diffused. Their identity lives not in letters, but in alignment. In the angle of a pillar, in the careful spacing of trilithons, in the subtle corridor through which solstice light enters. We imagine them pausing often during construction, not rushing, not competing, but listening. Listening to the wind across the plain, listening to the horizon where the sun would one day rise through the stones, listening to the weight of rock settling into earth. Perhaps they did not think in terms of legacy, perhaps they thought in terms of continuity. In forgotten ages, before chronicles and contracts, people often worked for those not yet born. They built structures that would outlast their own breath. They shaped earth and stone, knowing they would never see the monument weather into legend. Their reward was not remembrance, it was alignment. As we dwell in this anonymity, curiosity softens into humility. The stones endure, yet the builders dissolved into dust. Where memory fades, the monument remains. There is something almost tender in that exchange. The human body, fragile and fleeting, lifted what it could not outlast. The name, once spoken in warmth and laughter, vanished into silence. But the act, the shared devotion, took form in stone. We move within the circle slowly, touching the air where others once stood. The ground beneath our feet feels firm, chalky, layered with centuries of weather and wandering. Beneath that, deeper still, lies soil pressed by the footsteps of those whose names we do not know. Perhaps that is why the monument feels less like a statue and more like a gathering. It does not commemorate a single hero. It does not exalt a king. It stands as collective breath made visible. Some scholars search for traces of hierarchy, for signs of leadership or command. They examine burial patterns, tool marks, distances traveled. They reconstruct possible social structures from fragments of bone and pottery. But even within these careful studies, one truth remains constant. The stones do not tell us who to remember. They do not distinguish one hand from another. They hold no hierarchy in their silence. As twilight deepens, the circle grows darker against the fading sky. The overlapping shadows merge into one broad pool of dusk. The individuality of each pillar becomes less distinct. They appear as a unified ring, one body of stone. The absence of names feels almost gentle now. It removes the burden of narrative. It frees the monument from biography. It allows the structure to belong not to one lineage, but to all who stand within it. In forgotten corners of the earth, sacred work was sometimes understood as offering to time itself, not to a ruler, not to a crowd, but to the turning year, to the rising sun, to the unseen continuity between ancestors and descendants. Perhaps this circle was such an offering, a gift left without signature, a prayer shaped in stone. The wind brushes past us again, threading through the gaps between pillars. It carries no echo of individual voices, and yet, within its sound, there is a faint resonance, a reminder that hands once pulled rope here, that feet once pressed into soft chalk, that breath once clouded in cold morning air. The builders are gone. Their names have softened into dust, but their intention lingers in geometry. We stand at the center of the ring as the last light fades from the horizon. The sky deepens into indigo. Stars appear one by one, steady and patient. The stones, now marked by the moon, glow faintly silver at their edges. In this moment, the absence feels complete, not empty, not tragic, but balanced. Not all sacred work requires remembrance. Some creations are offerings to time itself, structures raised not to preserve identity, but to dissolve it gently into something larger. The builders without names may have understood this. They may have known that to carve one's name into stone is to cling, but to lift stone without carving is to release. The monument stands, patient beneath the turning heavens. And we, standing within it centuries later, feel not the loss of names, but the presence of devotion. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some hands shape the world without needing to be known. As night settles fully across the plain, the circle becomes silhouette against a field of stars. The wind softens. The grass grows still. The builders without names rest somewhere beyond our knowing, return to soil, to sky, to silence, but the stones remain. And in their enduring presence, we sense a quiet truth. That anonymity can be sacred, that humility can be monumental, that not all legacies are meant to carry a signature. We leave the circle slowly, carrying with us the hush of that understanding. The plain stretches wide and oceanic beneath moonlight. The stones stand patient and veiled, and somewhere between dust and star, the unnamed builders continue their silent vigil, woven into the monument they raised, held not in letters, but in alignment. On certain nights, when the wind falls quiet and the plain lies hushed beneath a veil of silver, the moon rises pale and full above the horizon. It drifts slowly upward, unhurried, ancient as breath. And for a brief and tender moment, it hangs between the pillars, framed by stone, as though invited long ago. The journey begins with that lunar question. Was the circle aligned not only to the sun's blazing certainty, but to the wandering light of the moon? We stand at the edge of the ring beneath a star-marked sky. The grass whispers faintly at our ankles. The stones, crumbled at their edges and softened by centuries, glow with a dim radiance, marked by the moon's cool touch. There is no fire tonight, no solstice crowd, only the slow ascent of silver light. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, people once listened more closely to the moon than to the sun. The sun governs day with bold authority, predictable, measured, unwavering. But the moon is different. It wanes and waxes, it disappears and returns. It lingers in shadow before stepping forward again. Its rhythm is subtler, more mysterious. We imagine ancient watchers standing within this circle long before us, faces lifted not toward the fiery dawn, but toward the soft glow of night. They would have known the moon's phases intimately, the slender crescent resting like a curved blade above the horizon, the half-lit orb balanced between light and dark, the full disk swelling round and luminous, and they would have noticed something more. Whispers tell us that the moon does not rise at the same place each month. Over years, its path along the horizon stretches wider, then narrows again, tracing a long celestial spiral known only to the patient observer. There are rare moments, once in many years, when the moon reaches a distant arc, rising further north or south than usual, touching horizons it seldom visits. Some scholars suggest that the builders of the circle were aware of this lunar wandering, that hidden within the geometry of the ring are alignments not only for solstice sun, but for the moon's distant standstill, a pause in its long cycle, subtle and easily missed. They trace lines across maps and measure angles between stones. They note the positions of outer markers and distant hills. They speak of 18-year rhythms and celestial arcs. But beneath the silence, the stones say nothing. And yet, on nights like this, when the moon rises precisely between two towering pillars, framed as if by design, it is difficult not to wonder. Was this alignment deliberate? Or does our longing for pattern weave intention where only coincidence resides? The contradiction rests gently in the cool air. We move slowly within the ring as the moon climbs higher. Its light turns the circle into an intimate chamber. The sky, vast and oceanic beyond, feels closer here, held between upright stones like a sacred tapestry. The pillars cast long, softened shadows that overlap and merge. The ground shimmers faintly with dew. Each surface appears both solid and ethereal beneath silver glow. In forgotten centuries, perhaps rituals unfolded beneath this very light. Not loud ceremonies of fire and drum, but quiet gatherings of breath and listening. The moon has always carried a different authority, one that governs tide and sleep, tide and blood, tide and dream. Some believe the circle was a sanctuary for night rituals, a place where the community gathered when darkness felt full and alive rather than empty. The moon framed between stones would have felt like a guest entering sacred space. No scroll survives to confirm this. No carved script declares, "We watched the moon here." Only the patient stone remains. The emotional current deepens from fascination into serene wonder. The sun marks the year in bold strokes, longest day, longest night. But the moon moves in whispers. Its cycle is intimate, repeating month by month, yet also unfolding across longer spirals that require memory to perceive. To notice the moon's distant standstill, one must watch for years, decades perhaps. A single lifetime may not be enough. This suggests something profound. If the builders aligned stones to such a subtle rhythm, they were thinking beyond themselves. They were building not for one generation, but for many. They were carving patience into earth. Or perhaps the alignment is intuitive rather than precise. Perhaps the builders did not calculate degrees and cycles, but simply felt the moon's authority, its quiet dominion over night, its power to illuminate without heat. The stones become frames for silver light. The sky becomes an interior chamber. We pause at the center of the circle and look upward. The moon now stands high, resting between two lintels. It appears cradled by stone, held gently without being confined. Its surface, pale and cratered, carries its own ancient scars. It reflects sunlight from a distance, offering borrowed radiance to the earth below. Borrowed light. The thought feels fitting. The stones, too, borrow meaning from sky. They reflect not their own purpose, but the rhythms they frame. Was this circle a calculated observatory, or a sanctuary for night devotion? Perhaps both. Perhaps the builders did not divide the sacred from the measurable. To them, watching the moon's cycle may have been both practical and spiritual, tracking time while honoring mystery. The moon's rare standstill, when it pauses at the edge of its long arc, may have felt like a celestial breath held in suspension, a moment of balance before return. Imagine witnessing that. Imagine standing here as the moon rises at its furthest reach along the horizon, touching a place in the sky it will not touch again for many years. The watchers would have known they were seeing something precious, something that required patience and continuity. A knowledge passed from elder to child, a memory sustained across generations. Beneath the silence, the circle holds that possibility. The moon begins its slow descent toward the west. Shadows shift once more. The stones darken at their bases, silver at their crowns. The plain stretches beyond, vast and quiet. No inscription clarifies their purpose. No voice from the past emerges to say, "We align these stones to the moon's wandering light." The night remains wide. The circle remains patient. Where memory fades, the sky continues its rhythm. The moon waxes and wanes. It disappears into darkness and returns, slender and new. It reaches distant arcs and retreats again. Its cycle is both predictable and mysterious, measured and mystical. Perhaps that is the lesson held here, that not all alignments are meant to instruct with certainty. Some are meant to remind us of rhythm, of return, of the quiet authority of cycles that continue whether we witness them or not. The moon slips beyond the frame of pillars at last. It drifts into open sky, no longer cradled by stone. The circle returns to softer shadow, lit only by scattered stars. We stand in the hush that follows. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in diagrams or proven in calculations. Perhaps it was meant to be felt, this subtle framing of silver light, this intimacy between sky and stone. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some alignments are revealed only to those who stand long enough in the dark. As the moon climbs higher and the night deepens, the stones resume their watch. They do not move. They do not explain, they simply hold space, and we carry away a gentle awareness that even the darkest sky is marked by rhythm. Even wandering light follows a spiral of return. The moon will pass again between these stones, not tonight in the same way, not tomorrow, but in time. The cycle continues, the circle waits, and somewhere between shadow and silver, beneath the ancient hush of the plain, the rhythm of night endures, quiet, celestial, and kind. Before the stones were raised, before lintel touched pillar, before geometry entered the open sky, there was only land. A wide, unbroken plain, stretching beneath a star-marked vault of night. Grass, bending in the wind, like waves upon an oceanic field. No monument, no shadow cast by carved stone. Only horizon and sky meeting without interruption. The chapter begins there, in absence, in the quiet field where wind moves through tall grass under silver starlight. The earth is cool, the soil pale with chalk. The night air carries no echo of hammer or rope. It carries only breath, slow, rhythmic, ancient. Why was this place chosen? What breath lingered here before the first stone touched earth? It is said that in forgotten corners of the world, sacredness is not imposed, it is recognized. That certain places hum softly beneath the feet, that some landscapes hold a silence so complete it feels intentional. We stand in imagination upon that early plain. No circle marks the ground, no trench disturbs the soil. The stars stretch from one horizon to the other, unobstructed. The moon drifts low and luminous. The wind bends the grass in long spirals. The openness feels deliberate. The horizon curves gently, offering a full view of the sun's rise and fall. There are no mountains to block its path, no dense forests to veil the sky, only distance, only expanse. Some believe ancient pathways converged here, invisible lines of memory crossing the plain, routes walked for generations before the first stone was ever shaped. People moving across the land in quiet procession, following seasonal rhythms, tracing arcs between river and hill. Whispers tell us that the plain was not empty, even before the monument. It held footpaths pressed into grass. It held small gatherings beneath temporary shelters. It held the soft residue of presence. Others suggest the choice was practical. A high-ground ideal for watching the sun's path, a natural observatory where dawn and dusk could be seen clearly, year after year. The open horizon made alignment possible. Geometry required space. But beneath these explanations, something else lingers. The openness feels less like convenience and more like invitation, as if the earth itself offered this stretch of land, not for conquest, not for dominion, but for listening. In forgotten ages, people understood the land not as backdrop, but as participant. The plain was not merely where life unfolded. It was a living presence, breathing beneath foot and frost. We imagine the first time someone stood here at solstice dawn, the sky pale with early light, the wind low and steady, the horizon glowing faintly in the east. They may have felt it then, a sense of alignment without stone, a natural chamber where the sky framed itself. The narrative unfolds slowly, like mist lifting from grass. Before stone, there was soil. Before monument, there was memory. Perhaps small fires once flickered here at night. Perhaps elders told stories beneath constellations, unbroken by pillar or lintel. The stars would have felt vast, oceanic, overwhelming in their abundance. And yet, within that vastness, the plain held its breath. Some believe ancient earthworks preceded the stones, ditches and banks carved gently into chalk, a circle drawn not upward but inward, a boundary of intention pressed into land before stone ever rose. If this is so, then the first monument was not vertical, it was subtle, a shallow trench tracing a ring across grass, a quiet mark upon the plain. The land received it without resistance. Beneath the silence, the soil held that line as one holds a whispered promise. As we linger in this imagined beginning, the plain transforms from backdrop into presence. It remembers footsteps, it remembers gatherings, it remembers the hush before sunrise, when breath clouds in cold air and eyes turn eastward in expectation. The wind moves across it differently when people gather. It carries murmurs and warmth. It bends grass around standing figures. It lifts sparks from small fires into star-marked sky. The plain listens. It is said that some sacred spaces are chosen not for grandeur, but for their willingness to listen. This place does not overwhelm with cliffs or forest. It does not enclose with walls of rock. It opens, and in its openness, it holds. We imagine early builders walking slowly across this field, feeling the firmness of chalk beneath their feet. They pause. They look outward in all directions. The horizon curves gently like a bowl. The sky above feels close, almost intimate. Perhaps they sensed that this land did not resist the sky, it welcomed it. The choice to raise stones here was not an imposition upon emptiness, it was a response to something already present. As the narrative deepens, the emotional tone shifts from curiosity into belonging. The plain feels less like a random location and more like a participant in the ritual that would follow. It receives trenches and stones the way a body receives breath. it absorbs weight and shadow without complaint. When the first stones were brought, dragged across its surface from distant hills, the land did not protest. It accepted their weight. It cradled their bases in chalky embrace. The circle seems less imposed and more grown, like teeth rising from earth, like ribs emerging from soil. The stones do not feel foreign, they feel rooted. Where memory fades, the land remains. Empires would later cross this plain. Armies, pilgrims, wanderers. Languages would change, beliefs would shift. But the openness endured, the horizon remained unbroken, the sky continued its turning, and beneath all that passing history, the plain kept its quiet rhythm. We stand now at twilight, long after the stones have weathered into their softened forms. The grass sways gently around their bases. Shadows stretch long and merge into one another. The wind moves through the ring and across the open field beyond. The stones seem inseparable from the land. It is difficult to imagine this place without them now. And yet, before they stood, the plain was already sacred in its silence. The final reflection settles like moonlight. The stones are not the beginning of the story. They are its continuation. The land chose first. The sky answered. The people followed. As night deepens, the moon rises and casts silver across grass and stone alike. The plain resumes its quiet breathing beneath that pale glow. No crowd gathers now, no fire burns, only wind, only horizon, only the soft, steady presence of earth. Perhaps the true monument is not the circle of stone, but the openness that surrounds it. Perhaps sacred spaces are sometimes chosen not for spectacle, but for stillness. The plain that holds its breath continues to do so. It listens to wind, it listens to footstep, it listens to the slow turning of stars. And we, standing within its wide embrace, feel a gentle awareness that the sacred does not always rise in towers. Sometimes it lies flat beneath sky. Sometimes it waits in open fields. Sometimes it chooses us not through grandeur, but through quiet invitation. The moon drifts higher. The stones glow faintly, marked by its cool light. Beyond them, the plain stretches into darkness, vast and patient. And somewhere within that oceanic silence, the land breathes, ancient, veiled and listening still. Step within the circle, and something subtle shifts. The wind still moves across the plain. The sky still stretches wide and oceanic above. And yet, inside the ring, sound gathers differently. A whisper carried on air brushes against ancient stone and returns altered, softened, rounded, held for a breath longer than expected. The journey begins with that whisper, a single word spoken beneath starlight. It rises gently from the lips, meets the curve of a pillar, and drifts back, not as it left, but transformed. Was the ring shaped not only for sight, but for resonance? We stand at twilight, when the horizon is veiled in fading gold and the first stars awaken. The stones rise around us like the ribs of some ancient instrument, weathered, crumbled, marked by the moon. Their surfaces hold centuries of wind, but they also hold something else. They hold silence. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, sacred spaces were crafted not only to frame the heavens, but to shape the human voice. That architecture once listened as carefully as it was listened to. We take a slow breath and exhale a quiet hum. The sound does not escape into endless plain as it would outside the circle. It lingers, it bends, it touches stone and returns in a softened echo. Not loud, not dramatic, but present, as if the ring itself has answered. We imagine ancient figures standing here long ago, their feet pressing into chalky earth, their bodies arranged within the curve of pillars. Night deepens around them. A fire flickers low at the center, its light trembling against stone. A voice begins, not in proclamation, but in chant, low and steady. Another voice joins, then another. The sound thickens, not in volume, but in texture. The pillars catch the rhythm and cradle it. The air within the circle vibrates gently, alive with breath and tone. Some suggest acoustic intention, that the builders understood, even without scroll or formula, how curved surfaces gather and return sound, that they place stones not only in alignment with solstice light, but in relationship to resonance, that the ring forms a sacred chamber where voice becomes presence. Others believe the effect is incidental, a byproduct of form rather than purpose, a coincidence shaped by geometry. The echo was not designed, it simply emerged, and yet, once discovered, it became ritual. The contradiction rests lightly in the dusk. Whether deliberate or accidental, the echo exists, and in that existence, something meaningful unfolds. Beneath the silence, the stones feel less like objects and more like listeners. Their upright forms resemble ribs, as though the circle itself were a vast, ancient chest, breathing slowly beneath the sky. The metaphor lingers, an instrument without strings, a chamber without ceiling, an ear without flesh. We imagine drums sounding here, their rhythm slow and steady like the pulse of the earth. The vibrations would travel across the ground, rise along the pillars, and settle in the air above. The sound contained, but not confined. Voices lifted in chant would not vanish into distance. They would be held, returned, woven into a subtle tapestry of echo. In forgotten centuries, perhaps the people understood something intuitive about hearing oneself returned. When a voice leaves the body and comes back softened, it changes, it humbles, it comforts. It reminds the speaker that they are not alone in the air. Curiosity begins to shift into meditation. We walk slowly around the inner ring, pausing between pillars. Each space shapes sound differently. A whisper near one stone returns quickly, like a secret shared. A murmur near another lingers longer, folding into itself before fading. The effect is delicate, not overwhelming. The circle does not shout back. It listens first. Then it answers. Whispers tell us that in some ancient sites, sound was as sacred as light. That resonance was considered a form of alignment, an invisible geometry unfolding between breath and stone. Perhaps the builders noticed that certain arrangements amplified song while others dissolved it. Perhaps they tested positions with hum and drum, or perhaps they simply felt when the sound within the ring became whole. The echo feels like conversation, not between two people, but between human breath and the land itself. We stand at the center and speak nothing. Even silence feels amplified here. It has texture. It presses gently against the ears. The absence of sound becomes presence, thick and almost tangible. Where memory fades, silence remains. The wind brushes across the tops of the stones, creating a faint, hollow tone. It slips through gaps and hums softly. The circle responds not with resistance, but with resonance. The emotional current deepens into something tender. We consider the possibility that the builders understood the power of hearing oneself in a sacred space. That ritual was not only about watching the sun or tracking the moon, but about listening inward. When a voice is returned softened, it can change the heart. It becomes less sharp, less certain, more open. Perhaps the circle was a place to speak grief aloud and hear it answered gently by stone. A place to sing gratitude into dusk and feel it cradled by air. A place to chant the turning year and feel the rhythm reverberate beneath feet. Or perhaps it was simply geometry. Stone placed upright, wind moving freely, sound behaving as sound does. And yet, even coincidence can become sacred when experienced repeatedly. The layers unfold like rings within rings. The outer plane holds endless horizon and open sky. The inner circle holds resonance. Within that resonance, human breath becomes part of the architecture. The builders may have known that sight alone does not shape memory. Sound does. A melody can linger long after stone has crumbled. A chant can echo in the mind long after lips fall silent. The stones stand like guardians of both silence and song. We imagine standing here alone at night, no fire, no gathering, only stars overhead and grass swaying softly at the base of pillars. We whisper a single word into the dark. It returns, not as command, but as companion. And something within relaxes. The circle becomes less about spectacle and more about listening, less about monument and more about ear. Some monuments are meant to be seen from afar. This one invites you inward, to speak, to hear, to remain still. As the final reflection settles, night deepens. The stars multiply. The moon, marked by silver glow, drifts between pillars. Shadows stretch and merge across the ground. We stand at the center once more, speaking nothing. Even silence seems amplified here, thick and present, like velvet drawn across the senses. The absence of voice feels intentional, almost curated by stone. Whether crafted for calendar or temple, the circle becomes an ear to the world. An ear that listens to wind, an ear that listens to breath, an ear that listens to the subtle tremor of human presence. Perhaps the true alignment here is not only with sun or moon, but with sound itself, with the way our voices rise and return, altered by contact with something older than us. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some monuments are less about what we see and more about what we hear within ourselves. The wind softens. The plain beyond remains vast and open. Inside the ring, silence rests gently, held between pillars like a sacred offering. And as we step slowly back toward the edge of the circle, we carry with us not only the memory of stone and sky, but the faint resonance of our own breath, returned to us, softened, and strangely whole. At dawn, when the horizon blushes, faint rose, and the world is suspended between night and morning, the stones frame a precise slice of light. The journey begins there, a line drawn not on parchment, not inked by hand, but traced across the sky itself. A narrow path of radiance slipping between pillars of ancient stone, as though the heavens have chosen to pass through a gate carved from earth. We stand in the dim blue hush before sunrise. The air is cool, veiled in mist that clings low to the grass. Breath gathers softly at the lips and dissolves. The plain stretches wide and oceanic in its quiet, and within it the circle waits. Patient, unadorned, marked by the moon's fading silver. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, people once watched the sky not for curiosity alone, but for belonging. They did not see the heavens as distant or separate. They saw them as partners in a shared rhythm. Did the builders seek to bind earth and sky into that rhythm? The question rises gently, like the first glow along the horizon. We trace the angles of stone and shadow with slow attention. Each pillar stands deliberate in its place. Each lintel rests upon upright forms with quiet intention. From above, the ring forms a geometry both simple and profound, a circle within circles, arcs echoing arcs. But it is at dawn that the secret seems to reveal itself. A beam of light slips through a narrow corridor between stones. It travels along the ground, illuminating chalk and dew. It touches the inner ring, casting long, delicate shadows that stretch and merge. For a moment, brief but exact, the earth and sky appear joined by a single luminous thread. Some believe the circle was a vast instrument of time, that its builders observed patiently over years, perhaps generations, marking where the sun rose at solstice and equinox. That they noticed the gradual shift of light along the horizon, the way dawn crept northward and then southward again in a slow celestial spiral. In this telling, the monument becomes a calendar written in stone, a silent observatory mapping the turning year with quiet certainty. No scroll required, no ink needed. The alignment itself is the record. But others feel something softer within the geometry. They suggest that the act of aligning stone with sunrise was not merely about measurement, but about reverence. That the builders did not seek to capture time, but to honor it, to create a place where soil and starlight could meet in visible harmony. The contradiction feels gentle, almost harmonious. For is not measurement itself a form of devotion? To observe patiently, to notice the smallest shift of light along the horizon, to remember where the sun rose last year and the year before, this is a practice of attention. Attention is its own kind of prayer. We imagine ancient figures standing here before dawn, long before the monument weathered into legend. Their feet press into damp earth. Their eyes are fixed upon the horizon. They have stood here many times before, but this morning carries a particular weight. Perhaps it is solstice, perhaps equinox, perhaps simply the quiet joy of watching. The first sliver of sun appears. It aligns perfectly within the frame of stone. A breath is held. The beam widens slowly, filling the corridor with pale gold. The lintels catch the light along their edges. The pillars glow softly against the fading blue of night. The moment feels both calculated and miraculous. Was it crafted through careful observation, or gifted by chance, and later revered? Beneath the silence, the stones do not answer. They hold the light without comment. As the sun rises higher, the beam shifts. The precise slice of radiance dissolves into broader daylight. The careful framing disappears into ordinary shadow, yet something lingers in the air, a memory of alignment. Where memory fades, the earth remembers. We walk slowly along the outer ring, imagining the builders tracing lines across the land with simple tools and patient eyes. They had no instruments of brass or glass, no charts inscribed with celestial coordinates, only horizon, breath, and memory. It is said that to observe the sky in such a way requires stillness. One must return to the same place year after year, watching for patterns that unfold too slowly for haste. The builders may have stood here in youth and returned in age, witnessing the same dawn slip between the same stones. A geometry born not of ambition, but of continuity. Some scholars speak of precision, of angles measured, distances calculated. They note that certain stones align with midsummer sunrise, others with midwinter sunset. They see in the monument a deliberate map of celestial rhythm. And yet, beneath these findings, there remains a softness. To align stone with sunrise is both scientific and sacred. It requires observation, yes, but also humility. For no human hand can command the sun to rise at a chosen angle. One can only notice where it rises and shape earth in response. The act itself becomes a prayer in geometry. A circle drawn upon the plane, not to confine the heavens, but to greet them. As the emotional arc deepens, we sense that measurement and reverence need not oppose one another. To know the solstice is to feel it. To track equinox is to stand within its balance. The builders may have understood that knowledge and wonder are companions, not rivals. The sun climbs steadily now. The beam of light that once pierced the corridor has widened into day. The stones cast shorter shadows. Birds stir in distant hedgerows. The plain resumes its quiet breathing. The careful framing of light dissolves. The alignment is complete, and yet its memory lingers like a breath held and released. We stand within the circle long after the precise moment has passed. The pillars appear ordinary now, weathered, pale, almost silent against the vastness of sky. But we have witnessed something subtle, a bridge, not merely between seasons, not merely between past and present, but between the visible and the eternal. The stones do not reach upward in defiance. They do not pierce the sky. They stand firm upon earth, offering their surfaces as frames. The heavens pass through them freely. Perhaps that is the deepest alignment, not binding, but welcoming. As evening approaches and the sun lowers toward the western horizon, the circle prepares once more for shadow. The light shifts from gold to amber, from amber to violet. The sky grows vast again, star-marked and endless. The stones remain. They do not claim authorship of the dawn. They do not insist upon their own significance. They simply hold their place. Some structures are bridges. Some monuments are invitations. Perhaps this circle was never meant to be solved but experienced, not decoded entirely but stood within. A place where earth touches sky through patient alignment and where human breath finds its place between soil and starlight. The wind moves gently across the plain. The first stars emerge. The memory of morning's beam feels distant, yet present. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some alignments are revealed only in the quiet hour before dawn. And as night gathers softly around the circle once more, we carry with us the feeling that something ancient has been shared. Not an answer, but a harmony. A reminder that the line between earth and sky is not a boundary, but a meeting. The stones return to shadow. The sky continues its turning. And somewhere within that gentle exchange, the bridge endures, silent, sacred, and patient beneath the stars. Night settles over the circle slowly, like a dark veil drawn with reverent hands. The plain grows hushed. Wind softens to a whisper. Above, the sky deepens into indigo, and the first stars emerge, distant, star-marked, steady in their ancient watch. Within the ring of stone, a single flame flickers at the heart of the monument. The journey begins with that flame, small, trembling, alive. Its light dances against weathered pillars, illuminating cracks and lichen like pale script written by time itself. The stones, crumbled at their edges and marked by the moon, seem to lean inward toward the warmth, though they remain unmoving. Was this place once filled with ritual firelight? Or is the flame before us only a modern echo of ceremonies long forgotten? The question drifts upward with the smoke. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, fire was the first bridge between earth and sky, sparks rising like brief constellations, smoke coiling into the night as if carrying breath from the living to something unseen. We imagine gatherings long past, figures standing in a ring much like this one, shoulder to shoulder, cloaked in shadow, their faces lit by the glow at the center, their eyes reflecting flame and starlight together. No grand stage, no towering altar, only a small fire burning upon chalky earth. Some believe the circle marked seasonal rites, moments of turning in the year when the sun reached its furthest arc or returned from its retreat. They imagine flames kindled at solstice dawn, embers tended through longest night, warmth shared in vigil against frost. Others feel the ritual may have been simpler, to sit together, to gather in sacred silence, to feel the presence of one another beneath the vastness of sky. Beneath the silence, the flame becomes symbol of both presence and impermanence. Its light reaches outward, but does not overwhelm. It reveals texture, tiny fractures in stone, flecks of mineral dust, threads of moss clinging to ancient surfaces. The monument appears softer in firelight, less monumental and more intimate. The stones do not resist the glow, they accept it. As we linger within the ring, the emotional current begins to shift. Wonder gives way to something quieter, more tender. The fire crackles gently, wood surrendering to ember. The air carries the faint scent of smoke, earth and ash mingled. We imagine the sound of breath around the circle, the low murmur of voices at rest, not chanting, not proclaiming, simply being. In forgotten centuries, perhaps this place was not always filled with celestial calculation or geometric precision. Perhaps it was sometimes simply a hearth beneath the open sky, a place to share warmth, a place to grieve, a place to welcome a child into the circle of community or to release a name into memory. Whispers tell us that fire once accompanied burial rites within this sacred ground. Ash scattered, bones returned to soil, the flame not only for warmth, but for transformation, To burn is to change form, to glow briefly is to surrender to shadow. The stones, standing patient through all seasons, may have witnessed many such flames, some kindled in celebration, some in mourning, some in simple companionship. The circle becomes a chamber of light and shadow. The flame moves, its brightness never steady. It bends to the wind, flares unexpectedly, then softens again. Its dance is unpredictable, almost human. In contrast, the stones endure. They do not flicker, they do not waver. They do not reach toward the sky with flame. They remain. This contrast carries a gentle melancholy. Human presence, warm, luminous, brief. Stone presence, cool, grounded, enduring. The fire burns lower now, its light narrows. The cracks in the pillars, once vivid and etched, begin to recede into shadow. Lichen fades into grey. The edges of the circle soften. Emotion shifts into tender acceptance. Light dances briefly, then yields. Perhaps the builders understood this balance, that no flame lasts forever, that warmth must eventually surrender to night. The monument may have been shaped not only to mark celestial cycles, but to cradle human transience. The fire at the center becomes a mirror. It reflects our own impermanence, our brief illumination beneath vast sky. And yet, in that brevity, there is beauty. It is said that some fires are not lit to conquer darkness, but to honor it, to sit within shadow and say, "We are here," to let sparks rise not in defiance, but in gratitude. The stones neither celebrate nor grieve as the flame diminishes. They simply witness. As the ember glows faintly, the sky above grows richer in stars. The moon, marked by pale silver, drifts between pillars. Its light now joins the fading fire, weaving cool and warm into a delicate tapestry upon the ground. The final reflection unfolds without spectacle. The flame trembles once more, then settles into a low red pulse, a soft glow within a cradle of ash. No sudden extinguishing, no dramatic collapse, only a gentle yielding. The ember dims. The circle returns to moonlit calm. Smoke lingers briefly in the air, then dissolves into night. The ground at the center holds a faint warmth that will fade by morning. The stones resume their pale vigil beneath the stars. Whether calendar or temple, observatory or sanctuary, the monument remains patient. The absence of flame does not diminish it. In fact, the silence after the fire feels fuller, thicker, sacred. Where memory fades, shadow remains to hold what light once revealed. We stand alone now within the ring, listening. The wind moves softly through the gaps between pillars. Grass bends gently. The night is vast, but not empty. The absence of flame feels almost intentional, as if the circle teaches not only how to gather around warmth, but how to sit within its passing. Some monuments are less about spectacle and more about endurance. Some rituals are less about brilliance and more about release. We step slowly toward the edge of the ring. The plain stretches wide and oceanic under starlight. The stones stand in quiet silhouette, patient, veiled, ancient. Behind us, the last ember fades completely, and yet something remains, a quiet understanding. That light does not need to overpower darkness to be meaningful. That warmth shared briefly can linger long in memory. That the sacred does not always blaze, it sometimes glows and then rests. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some fires are lit, not to conquer the night, but to remind us how gently it can be honored. The circle breathes beneath the moon. The plain holds its silence, and we walk into the darkness, not in fear, but in gratitude, carrying within us the memory of a small flame that flickered, warmed, and then returned to ash beneath ancient stone.